Autism and Anger Management. In this Patron's Choice video, we're looking at the question of why do we explode sometimes? I don't know if you can relate to this, but why are sometimes little tiny things so incredibly infuriating? And most importantly, what can we do about it to make sure that we're looking after our own mental health and not damaging our relationships with the people around us? Hi everyone, Paul Mikolev here from Asperger's from the Inside. I make weekly videos sharing the human side of autism, so make sure you hit subscribe to get the latest content. So to start off with, we'll look at the effect of poor anger management on our mental health and relationships. I'll share a model that can help us understand what's actually going on, as well as a personal example that I've had some success with recently. And finally, we'll go through a handful of helpful strategies to actually do something about it. So firstly, why is anger management even important? What happens if we don't manage this very well? And there are two major areas that come to mind. Firstly, it could seriously damage my relationship with the people around me if I'm letting my anger out on them. And secondly, it can be negative to my own mental health if I'm carrying all of these emotions within me without a good way to process it. And something I've realized recently is actually, in my case at least, and I don't know if you resonate with this, but they're actually both the two sides of exactly the same coin. If I get into the habit of holding things in, then eventually it'll get too much and I'll have to let it out in probably a dramatic fashion. So the problems of letting anger out inappropriately and holding on to anger too much are actually two sides of the same coin, which is good news because we can address both of these issues in similar ways. So whether you're more likely to explode or implode, you should find the models and strategies in this video applicable regardless. So to help us understand what's actually going on here, I'm going to share a model with you that I actually learned from my niece's preschool. So I actually find that really fantastic and hopeful that they're starting to teach emotional regulation to young children these days. So it's a very, very simple model, but it's also incredibly powerful. And the concept is of a bucket, or I don't have a bucket with me at the moment. So let's say a cup. And the concept is that there are stresses in our life that kind of fill us up with stress and anger and negative emotions. And there's only so much that we can take before we become full. So this helps us to recognize what are the things that are filling my bucket. And we can also ask ourselves the question, what are the things that help me to empty my bucket? If my bucket is getting too full, how can I empty it? It also helps us to understand that if my bucket is getting too full, there are good and bad ways to empty it. If I dump my bucket on someone else, it's not very helpful. All I'm doing is filling up their bucket and making them angry and frustrated. So I don't want to dump my anger, empty my bucket onto someone else. What I would like to do is find a way to constantly, slowly empty my own bucket so that I feel better and I don't have to let my anger out on other people. So let's look at the two main concepts of this very, very simple model. Number one, what is it that fills up my bucket? What is it that makes me stressed and anxious and angry in the first place? So this could be things like a sensory environment. This could be things like challenging social situations. It could be things not going my way. It could be uncomfortableness and difficulty that I have to bear with in my daily life. And every time there's some little frustration or something doesn't go my way, or I'm trying something and it's not working, my frustration and anger and everything is just slowly building up and I'm feeling less and less okay. So on the flip side, what are the things that help me empty my bucket? What are the things that help me feel more relaxed, help me feel more in control? Meditation, exercise, especially strenuous exercise, is a really good one. journaling, venting, talking to someone. Professional help can often be helpful there as well, in terms of managing and working through the emotions that I've got stuck within me to make sure I can find a way to release them all. So whatever this looks like for you, whatever it is in your life, in your environment that tends to irritate you and get you more and more worked up, and whatever it is that for you personally helps you to manage that and let it go and let it out again in a healthy way, these are the questions that you can answer for yourself to help manage your own situation. Okay, so what about the question of why do we sometimes seem to explode over seemingly very, very little things? So there are a couple of possible reasons for this. Number one, maybe I was really close to my limit already. What if it was the last straw that broke the camel's back and I was almost overflowing, and this tiny little thing meant that the dam was completely broken and I completely emptied my bucket over a very small thing. One of the common things that happens is that it's not always easy to notice our own stress and our own anxiety and our own irritation, especially if we're in the habit of living with a significant amount of background anxiety, a significant amount of background irritation where I just don't feel comfortable in any situation. I'm always stressed and anxious. How do I know what a good level for me is, and how do I know when I'm getting closer to my limit? So for a lot of us, sensing our own level can be quite difficult in that regard. So if I'm not sure where my level is, I might be getting closer to overflow, closer to overwhelm without actually realizing it, and I could potentially seem fine or normal on the outside. This is my normal stressed and anxious self compared to my at my very limit stressed and anxious and irritable self. And then this very, very small thing, if it tips me over the edge, or interestingly, if it gives me the fear of I might go over the edge, right? Anxiety is a self-fulfilling feedback loop in this sense. Then I can get very angry at a situation that is pushing me closer to the edge, and I need to act right now to make sure I don't go over the edge. So that's why sometimes very, very small things can create a big reaction, because I'm trying to make sure that I don't get overwhelmed in this situation. Another possibility is that something seems like a very small thing, but it actually significantly affects me in some way. So it might look like not much from the outside, but actually it fills my bucket up halfway in just in 1 second. So in that sense, it's not so much that I was already at my limit, it's that whatever happened, I was very sensitive to, and it gave me a lot of anger, a lot of frustration, a lot of irritation in a very short space of time. So this might be due to a very specific event, it might be a very specific sensory thing or a very specific triggering situation. We often use that word for something very small that has a big reaction. Alternatively, you might just be more emotionally reactive in general. Some people describe this as part of ADHD, for example, where it's possible to get very excited very quickly and very upset very quickly. So ironically, if you're the kind of person who can get filled very quickly, anxious, irritable, upset very quickly, it's also possible that you also have the ability to get rid of all of those emotions very quickly as well. So the moral of the story is whatever goes in must come out. I need to find a way to empty myself of anger and irritation and frustration as quickly, if not more quickly, than I get filled from the situation around me. So let me give you a personal example to kind of bring this stuff into real life. So I can sometimes get very, very angry when I feel as though I'm not being listened to, when I feel like I'm being ignored or rejected or dismissed or anything like that, where I'm like, I'm here and you're not seeing me, right? So I think that's a fairly universal human desire to be seen and heard, but I particularly can be very, very sensitive to that. So, working with my counselor, we identified that my intense, immediate anger in that moment was actually due to the fact that I had something to say that wasn't being heard. So what we actually did is we worked through it to find some words to my anger during that moment, because anger doesn't have words. Like, emotions use a completely different part of our brain that don't necessarily get translated into words. So sometimes it can be helpful to put words to feelings to get a better sense of what they're trying to do for us. And we found out that my anger was trying to shout, you imagine like an angry, frustrated shout, "Hear me." I was angry and frustrated, shouting, "Hear me." But interestingly, I was not angry or shouting on the outside. I don't often let my anger out in that way. I don't tend to explode, I tend to implode. And for those who don't know what that feels like, imagine there's a bomb and it's about to explode, and instead of letting it explode, I jump on top of it and shield it with my body. It still explodes, but I bear the brunt of all of that force of the explosion so that no one else gets hurt. Only I get hurt. So it's easy to imagine, at least for me, that that was a fairly good coping strategy, or at least better than exploding and letting it out on everyone else around me, which is true to some extent, I guess. However, obviously that's not good for me, because I still bear the brunt of that explosion on the inside. So that's what I mean by, I say, when I get very angry, I don't explode, I implode in that sense. So maybe you can relate to that. Now, the trouble with this, I'll call it a habit, not a strategy, because strategy kind of implies that I was doing it on purpose. But the trouble with this habit is that it leads to a lot of built up resentment, because in my head, someone else makes me angry, I implode, I then save them from my anger, and I bear the negative consequences, and they don't receive any of the negative consequences for their actions, right? So this is kind of the story that's going on in my head. And this is where it's the two sides of exactly the same coin. Because if I'm constantly protecting other people from my anger and holding it inside so it damages me instead, there's only so long that I can do that before I can't take it anymore, and I eventually build up so much resentment that I let it out in an inappropriate way, or I actually do explode, or I lose control of that, whether that's a meltdown or shutdown or whatever it is. Something has to give eventually, because I can't keep building up and building up and building up, because eventually I'm going to reach my limit and overflow, overwhelm, explode, whatever that looks like in that moment. So, new strategy, much more healthy strategy. I've had significant success personally with this strategy recently. Instead of imploding, silencing myself, saying nothing when my brain is shouting, "Hear me, I just have something to say," what I do instead is I actually say out loud, verbally, what I need to say. Now, this is a huge difference compared to putting the other person's needs before mine. Now, I can't control the situation. Whether the other person is going to hear me or not is completely not within my control. But what is within my control is that I have delivered my message. I have said what I need to say, and I have let that off my chest in a calm way, and now I've released it, and it doesn't need to keep building up the anger within me anymore. I also ran into the problem that when I'm that angry, I can't articulate things very well. So what I would do instead is I would take a break and basically write in my journal until I can eventually figure out the thoughts of, why am I so angry in this situation? What is it about this situation? What is it about the other person's behavior or my behavior or the whole situation that is leading me to feel like this? And what do I need to say? What do I need to do in response to that? And then once it's clear, I'll make sure that I don't explain it, but I'll express it in a very, very short phrase. And then once I've said that, I feel 100 times better because I'm not holding it in. I've found a healthy way to express what I need to say in a way that doesn't hurt the people around me either. So that in itself has had a huge impact on my mental health. Suddenly, I have an effective way to almost instantly empty my bucket of all of that anger and frustration. Previously, I was walking around with all of it inside me. And you know what happens if you walk around and you're grumpy and irritable and easily annoyed and full of stress and anxiety and all of that stuff? Number one, it doesn't feel good for you, obviously. That feels like an understatement. Secondly, as I say in my emotional intelligence course, right, a really good frame to think about this kind of stuff is that emotions leak. If I am feeling grumpy and irritated and stressed and anxious and all of these things, the people around me are going to pick up on that. It's going to leak onto them. My negativity that I'm carrying around in my bucket is going to be leaking onto the other people around me in a negative way that is likely to damage our relationship. Or worse, when someone does something to irritate me or anger me or something, instead of being a little bit irritated or a little bit angry, instead I'll end up dumping my entire bucket on them when it really wasn't appropriate to do that. A little bit of anger and irritation is often appropriate, right? We need this. It's a communication thing to let someone else know that I was not happy with their actions, for example. But what is not okay is for me to dump a week's worth of built up anger and frustration on the one person who added that last drop to my bucket so it overflowed. So what do you think? Can you resonate with this? Do you find that sometimes you explode or implode? Do you find yourself carrying around a bucket full of anger and frustration and irritation? So if that is you, hopefully now you've got a better sense of what's going on, and we can look at 3 areas to help manage this for ourselves. So the first area is to avoid unnecessary stress. What can I do to make sure that there are not that many things in my environment that are constantly filling up my bucket in the background that are not actually giving me any benefit in return? Things like background noise or background stress or background anxiety. Is there anything that I can do in my life to remove as many of those background things as possible so that my baseline is a lot more healthy to begin with? Secondly, I can look for those tiny things that do have a big impact on me and find a way to manage them better, either by avoiding them or changing the situation a little bit or coming up with a strategy to manage them in the moment, like I did with my frustration of not being heard. Thirdly, I want to look for ways to regularly empty my bucket. Daily habits that happen all the time that ensure that whatever residual anxiety or irritation or frustration or whatever is building up in me that just is naturally bound to happen in daily life, I have regular habits that allow me to process that and get rid of that. Things like exercise, socializing, meditation, those kind of things that I want to plan into my everyday life. And finally, how do I empty my bucket really quickly when I need to? So if something is triggering, I need to deal with that ASAP so that I don't end up carrying that around with me for longer than necessary. So if you've got a very pattern-oriented brain like I do, you'll notice that these 4 strategies are essentially broken up into ways to prevent my bucket from being filled, both in small ways and big ways. And secondly, ways to empty my bucket both in small, regular ways and in big ways if necessary. So what these strategies will actually look like in your daily life will depend on your personal situation. If you'd like more tips on how to manage these types of situations, I've also done a video on 4 proven ways to improve your mental health. And it's also worth noting that one of the ways to improve your mental health is by getting professional help. I mentioned earlier that the coming up with my personal strategy, I had help from a counselor, and actually that counselor was online through BetterHelp. So if you think that kind of help would be good for you too, you can check out the BetterHelp link in the description. Full disclosure, BetterHelp provided me with both a free trial and a sponsored link so that I could test out their platform for myself and tell you honestly what I thought about the experience. If you decide to try it too, you can use the sponsored link in the description below to get 10% off your first month and support this channel in the process. So we should leave it there for today, but thanks for watching. I hope you found this video very helpful. Thank you to our Patreon community for voting for this video. Your personal questions have been really helpful to make sure that I actually answer the burning questions that you have, so that's been really good. For anyone else watching, if you'd like to have your say in next month's Patron's Choice video, you can become a cup of coffee supporter of this channel for less than $1 a week. So please consider that if you'd like to support this channel financially. Otherwise, thanks again for watching, and I will see you again next week. Thanks. Bye.